Warning, this episode contains strong language or mature themes. Parental discretion is advised.
I always like to listen to music.
So do I.
I brought my tapes. I'll just accept it in. And now we push this button.
Welcome to This Podcast Is Uncalled For.
What's uncalled for about it?
What we doing in Tijuana?
You met a girl, didn't you? I was like, oh, how did you know? He was like, oh, because it always happens. It always happens. It's the only stupid reason that you would ever drop the ROTC. Because of a stupid girl.
And then look, thank you, back home.
Oh, that's going to be great for the football charts.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I can think of 100 right off the top of my head.
Is paid a genre?
So it's just a lot happens behind the scene that people don't know about. Like it's hard for the average voter to understand how much of what they think is their democracy is decided by faceless people to them. You know, you and I know who's making these decisions.
There you go. These are the kind of discussions we have. Fortunately, we're both fairly level-headed people. Again, we're looking at each other in the eye. We're not going to say anything derogatory to the other person. And, of course, neither of us is drunk.
Take me to Gay's barbecue.
That's a bit of a slap in the face and an insult.
But you didn't even give him a chance for a wild card spot.
And the look on Mike's face.
They love big boys like you.
It's kind of like, what is that character from Guardians of the Galaxy who takes everything literally? The people are out there, like they could have taken it literally.
Yeah, we're crazy people and we love what we do, and so we just keep creating regardless of how hard it can be sometimes.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
Oh, absolutely.
And remember, know you.
That is uncalled for, Michael.
And now, your host for this podcast, Mike Chernevsky.
I have a lot more on this tape. Here. Listen to this.
Well, the name of this podcast is Stuff Uncalled For?
This podcast is uncalled for.
Podcast, all right. Well,
And all y'all, subscribe and like and comment and subscribe.
Yeah.
I said it. Fuji.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. So, from day one of this podcast, it was a goal of mine to get at least one fellow ex-Mormon on the podcast to talk about their experiences with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as the Mormon Church is officially known. And today, we got that interview. We're open to other interviews from other ex-Mormons, so do feel free to contact me about that. Now, for this particular interview, before we really get into it, there are some terms that are used that I feel I need to define before we get into the interview. So, first, the initials MTC, that is the Missionary Training Center in Provo, Utah, right next to the Brigham Young University campus. BYU, of course, being the big LDS university, and just joined the Big 12 conference, so they'll have to play the likes of KU and all that, but that's a different story. DNC, as everyone knows, the Mormons use the King James version of the Bible as well as the Book of Mormon, but they have a couple of other books. One of them is called the Doctrine and Covenants, which gets shortened down to DNC. And that book is mostly like instructions on how to run the church, and this is where you'll find the word of wisdom, which is the no alcohol, no tobacco, no tea, no coffee part of Mormonism. And we don't mention it here, but the Pearl of Great Price is also one that they use, and that includes the very controversial book of Abraham. Now, the ritual that our guest is describing is known as the endowment. In LDS temples, basically 3 things, possibly 4, go on. The first is baptisms for the dead. That's you get baptized as a proxy for someone who has passed. This, by the way, is why Mormons are into genealogy. So you get baptized their dead relatives. And in LDS thinking, being baptized for someone doesn't mean they automatically accept the baptism, but they have the option to accept the baptism and anything else that happens in the temple for that matter. So we got that. Next is the endowment, which our guest is clearly describing the pre-1990 version of the endowment, where they did have the death penalties for revealing precisely what our guest reveals. There is a good movie reference I'm going to pitch to you. It is The God Makers by Edward Decker. And it shows dramatizations of exactly that with the death penalties and such. Now for a more modern depiction of the endowment ceremony, I highly recommend Mike Norton's YouTube channel, New Name Noah. And credit to Mike Norton for having the balls to go into an LDS temple to get that for everyone to see. And the third thing that happens in an LDS temple is sealings, or marriages for time and all eternity. So you're not just married for till death do you part, you're married for time and all eternity in LDS temples. And the fourth thing that sometimes happens is called the second anointing, and even practicing Mormons know little about that one. So we don't really go into it here. So it is pretty cool that we have an ex-Mormon talking with us today, and even cooler that this ex-Mormon, like me, also grew up in the Roman Catholic Church. That's about it. So let's please welcome Daniel John Carey to the podcast.
Got it.
All right. So welcome to this podcast is uncalled for. If you could please introduce yourself for our audience.
Hi, most people call me John. My name's Daniel John Carey. I wrote a few books. Dream Your World, Dream Another Dream. And I'm all sweaty and wet because I just went jogging and running a few miles. It's hot outside. But I'm on this because I met you on Facebook, and we have a similar history where we grew up Catholic, and then we joined the Mormon Church cult. Yes. Or whatever you want to call it. And and so we could talk about that and maybe my books a little bit and how I ended up in the Mormon cult and what happened with the Catholic Church. But I'm not involved in any religion at all anymore. I'm a heathen.
All right. Yeah, that makes two of us. So yeah, just long story short, of course, raised Catholic, was never confirmed Catholic. converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as they are officially.
Oh, you're skipping.
Yeah. So converted Mormonism.
Still there?
I'm still here. I'm still here.
Hi. You went off. You went away for a moment.
Okay.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I got the your internet
You
connection.
said you weren't.
All right.
Oh, mine is.
My
I thought it was
my answer.
Oh, okay. I heard you have power grid problems there this weekend.
Yeah, we had a big rainstorm on Friday, and we actually lost power for a couple of days here. So, depends on what part of the city you're in, but it's my part of town. Yeah, we did lose power for 2 days, so we only got it back yesterday. So,
wow.
Yeah. Anyway, converted to Mormonism as a senior in high school. At the missionaries came by, and was actually baptized New Year's Eve '96, and it was right at that age where they expect young men to start thinking about doing their missions. Well, I had just converted. I'm not ready for a mission.
Yeah.
So I went to college, and I actually had a Mormon employer throughout all of college, and then what really did for me was I had on 9/11. Oh well, 9/11/01. We all know what happened on that day. I go into work because I still had to work that day, and my employer, again, true believing Latter-day Saints, comes up with all of our gear and says, "Well, the world's ending."
Really?
Yeah. So that scared me and pushed me away from the church and all that, and a few other things too. I officially left after college, so 2004 is when I wrote my letter to Salt Lake, and I was out shortly after. That said, Mormonism is still very much a big thing in my life because I am less than a mile away from Mormon Mecca, also known as Independence, Missouri. So,
yeah, I've never been over that way. That's one state I've never been to. I've been to most of them. Well, I actually joined when I was 20, right when I turned 22. And but I did go on a mission. And but I grew up where'd I go? I went to New England. So stateside, and it wasn't much of a change for me because I grew up in Ohio. So it was like similar to, I mean, the landscape sort of in a similar way, a lot of the same trees and plants and birds and stuff. But I mean, New England is a lot different than Ohio in certain ways. There's a lot more, a whole different type of an industry thing going on. There are a lot of universities and educated people, which is good. Not that there aren't any in Ohio, but I grew up poor, and my family had 8 children. So, and I was one of the youngest. And when I was 4, things fell apart because both of my parents had head injuries. My father was in a car accident, and then my mother, our house was gutted by a fire in the middle of the night, and she fell down the stairs and landed on her head. And they both spent time in the hospitals with head injuries. And then you get sent home, and then you're fine. But back then it was, even now there's still, the brain is a mystery, but even back then it was even, they knew even less about the brain. But my parents had changed personalities, and everything kind of fell apart, and we went into poverty. We were shoved into poverty, and we didn't have, all my grandparents were dead before I was born. So I didn't have any aunts or uncles either because my parents were both only children. So I grew up in this kind of wild household with a bunch of brothers who did whatever they wanted, and our parents didn't seem to care. And they even said they didn't want kids anymore, and we just did whatever. And pot smoking and beer was common in my brothers' lives by the time they were like, I mean, some of them started drinking by the time they were 8 or 9 years old, because there is an endless amount of free alcohol up the street behind the bars, because they're always putting their bottles be on the bars at night. And so I grew up with alcoholic brothers, and I was abused. I mean, my family was really troubled, and my father and mother just didn't have it together. They didn't get the help they needed, and there was a lot of abuse and violence and stuff and alcoholism. And so I grew up in a really, tough kind of childhood. Grew up in Ohio, but we stopped going to church when I was in fourth grade, and I don't even know. Nothing was explained to me. All I knew is we're going to public school next year, and then it was a big difference between, at least the Catholic school, they keep you in line, like you have to obey and you have to dress a certain way and you have to wear a tie and you have to, but once we got to public school, it was like a free for all. My brothers even lost it even more. But so it was kind of wild. But and when you're an unsupervised child and you do whatever you want, you just wander around, there's things that happen and people notice and the wrong people notice. And so I was a mess by the time I was like 14. I was already smoking weed and getting drunk and turning into a mess of a child, and I had no guidance. But so I think part of it was when I joined the Mormon Church, my psychologist said I was looking for structure in my life. And but I had been through so much, and when I was 16, after a violent incident with 4 of my brothers, I hitchhiked to California in the middle of winter with like a broken nose and black eye and injured back. And I just wanted to see the ocean because I thought I was going to die young, and I just wanted to see the ocean before I died. But I did. And I went back and I graduated from high school because I wanted to go back there for that only. And I just went back to more violence. It was just awful. But when I was in 11th grade, my father, who barely never said anything to me, came in to the kitchen. I was sitting at the back table listening to some rock and roll on the radio quietly, and he said, "So you're going to graduate soon, huh?" And I was like, "No, I don't. I have another year left." And he's like, "Well, okay. So when you graduate, I don't ever care to see your face or hear your voice or know anything about you ever again." And then he walked out of the room, and I said, "Okay." And so that was that. But I already planned on not being there anyway because it was such a mess. And I had hitchhiked to California a few months before that, and I was like, I saw the outside world and that people were a lot different. And I actually felt safer hitchhiking than I did living in my parents' house because it was so violent. And but yeah, I did. I was Catholic baptized, and then I went through my first communion, and then I went through the classes to become confirmed. And then they didn't really like my family. But then I was one of the youngest, and I was one of those Carey boys, and the nurses and I mean the nuns and the priests really didn't like my family at all. But I went through the classes every like once a week for like 2 months or whatever it was. And then when it came to make my confirmation, they told me that they didn't have enough wardrobe for everybody to go through the confirmation. And it's just, sorry, we don't have enough costume of the robe or whatever. So I didn't actually make my confirmation. I still went and to school, to church once in a while, even though I didn't, yeah, nobody else went, but I would go once in a while. But the last time I went to Catholic church on a Sunday, I was by myself, and I had one of those, like fake plastic, I guess, bomber pilot coats with the fake fur and the but I wore that to church, and everybody was kind of looking at me. I didn't know what was going on, and like sneering, and a lot of people at church didn't like us because I didn't, and I was one of them, like, according to a lot of people. But so I got home and I noticed a spoon was stuck to my arm of my coat with peanut butter cookie dough. Dried, and nobody even at church said, "Oh, by the way, there's a spoon stuck to your coat." So I felt really embarrassed, and I never went back. But I did go to Catholic church one more time when I was like 20. I had a girlfriend who was Catholic, and she wanted me to, not that she was like trying or anything, but she asked me to go to church with her once, and I went with her once. But it just, I don't know. I got creeped out because of the things that happened to me when I was little. I was creeped out by the priests because there was so much news about pedophile priests, and I had stuff happen to me when I was little, including when I was 13, I was a newspaper boy, and this man got a hold of me and did stuff to me. And I was just afraid of adults anyway. But so yeah, that was my background before I went into the sort of part of my background before I went into the Mormon church. Did your family, anybody in your family join?
Just me.
Oh, okay. They were probably happy when you left.
Well, they were accepting of whatever I chose to do for myself, whether it was become Mormon or join another church or go to no church at all. So yeah, none of my family are still practicing Catholics, although my day job, I'm a chess instructor, and I go to Catholic schools and public schools all the time for clubs once a week, and yeah, my opinion, yeah, the Catholic school kids, they can be nuts sometimes.
Yeah, all kids, I guess, but yeah, there's a certain type of mentality, no matter what they were raised in. They have their own types of behavior that are aligned with their religious or whatever background. When I graduated from high school, I was drunk, and I guess I was lightly tripping on acid. There was those leather bags that people fill with alcohol, and they put them on there. But somebody was passing one of those around, and I drank some. I was in the stands, and then somebody told us that there was acid in there, and they meant to tell us. So I was, I guess, lightly tripping on acid, and I was drunk when I graduated from high school. Nobody in my family showed up, but I worked in factories, and then I moved to California, and I was a mess. I wasn't prepared for life. I worked at a pet store for a while as a dog groomer. And then I was working in movies, on TV shows and movies as a background actor, because I had braces and I looked like I was really young. So I was always on TV shows and movies as a high school student. And then there was a big strike in Hollywood, a writer's strike, there's another writer's strike going on now.
As we're speaking, yes.
Down. Yeah. And yeah, I'm also a SAG member, so there's a double strike in Hollywood right now. The writers and the
I heard about that too.
Actors are striking. But back then, when I was young, there was a big strike, and I had been working on different sets, and I was actually friends with them. There were a lot of people who did background before they were famous, like Kevin Costner. I used to hang out with him when we did background work together, and that was fun. One time we skipped out, we went and played Frisbee, and then we went back to set, and they didn't even notice we were gone. But so when there was this big strike, I signed up for a temp agency to do office work. A friend of mine did it. He's like, you should do this. And so I signed up, and I was working in offices, like stuffing envelopes and moving furniture and everything. And then the temp agency called me one day and asked me if I'd mind working in a private home, because this woman has a lot of, she has an office in her house, and she needs some help in her office. And I said, sure, why not? And then they said, okay, we'll call you back with the information. So they called me, they said it was Peggy Lee, the singer. I don't know if you that, yeah. And so I went to her house, and then her mansion up in the hills in Bel Air. And she asked me to move into her house and work for her because her butler quit, and Bernard Lafferty. And so I ended up moving in the next day, but I kept my apartment. And I had a dumpy little apartment, and I was working for Peggy Lee, and it got really weird. She was very talented and very sadly messed up. She would talk about it in interviews. Her life was very troubled, but so I'm not saying anything secret, but she had problems with drugs, and it was obvious when I was living there. And she was a recluse, so she was always in her bedroom suite, basically, and that's where she was all day, all night, and talking on the phone. And like Frank Sinatra and all these people would call, and everybody was really nice except Frank. Tony Bennett was great. But so I worked there for like 6 months, and I quit because there was just too much contention with her mood swings. And I went back and lived in my apartment. My apartment was like in Westwood, where a lot of UCLA students live. And that was pretty wild, because I was young, and so other kids around me who were like 18, 19 who were still living at home would come and hang out in my apartment and smoke weed and stuff. And there was this one guy who would hang out there. His name was Tony. He lived in Venice, and he was a little bit, I think he was my age or a year older than me or something, or a few years older, I don't know. But he was a mess. And but he ended up writing a book called Awaken the Giant Within, Anthony Robbins. And he's now worth like 600 million. But when I was working for Peggy Lee, the guy who quit before me, Bernard Lafferty, he the butler, he was from Ireland, and he would call me and we'd talk on the phone all the time. And he would tell me how to do my job as a butler for Peggy Lee. I had to make all the food. And there was this lady who hung out at the mansion. And I thought she was just somebody who used to work for Peggy Lee. And she was kind of like this older hippie lady. And she would hang out with me in the kitchen making food and stuff. And later I found out it was Doris Duke, she was worth like $700 million. The private jets, mansions on each coast, a mansion in Hawaii. And here she was like helping me make salads and stuff for Peggy Lee. And we were talking about all sorts of stuff. And she would, I guess maybe she enjoyed that I didn't have any idea who she was. But then I was just such a mess, and I didn't have any direction in life. I didn't have any college education, or I was barely like educated at all about anything. And I ended up at one point homeless. And but I wanted to get my life together. And there was also a point where like I was fearful of the phone ringing because I was afraid one of the girls I was with was going to tell me she was pregnant. And I was like, I can't live like this. This is crazy. And so I met these Mormon girls, and they seemed nice. And I wanted to get my life together. And I went to the library, and I didn't really know anything about sexually transmitted diseases. And I read up on them at the library, and I'm like, oh boy, I better straighten up my life. Because at one point I was living with a stripper. And she was way older than me. I think she may have been as old as 34 when I was 20. And so I had a wild life. But I was like, I don't want to live like this anymore. And so I met these Mormon girls, and I started but they wouldn't like make out or anything, which is a bummer. They're like, you have to be Mormon. We only date Mormon boys. And it's like, eventually I joined the church, and I moved to Florida, and I joined there, and I was baptized in the ocean. And when I was 22, and then I moved back to California, and the Mormon girls were like, you got to go on a mission. You got to go on a mission. And so I didn't know what else to do. I was going to college. I should have stayed in college. I was driving limousines and going to college. I had an apartment on the beach in Santa Monica. Like I gave that up to go on a mission, and here I'm living. That was a trip. Did you go through the temple?
I did not. The closest I got to the temple was reading about it online. I think it's Richard Packham's blog. And then I actually got to see it thanks to a new name Noah, Mr. Mike Norton. And that's some crazy stuff, shall I say. And the only time I ever set foot in an LDS temple was shortly after I converted. The St. Louis temple opened, and they did the open house, and that was the only time I set foot in an LDS temple. I know where the temples in Kansas City and Houston are, because my grandmother, rest in peace, lived fairly close to the Houston temple, and the KC temple up north of the river was pretty close to my workplace. I did get a chance to go through the RLDS temple here in Independence, which is open to the public, and highly recommend for anyone to check out there. Yeah, very nice setup and very nice people. So.
Oh yeah, I've heard everybody's over there, and that is really nice, friendly people from what I've heard. I've never been there. I've met some here. They were vacationing, and they were as pleasant as can be. But when the temple thing is like, I joined the church. I didn't really know much about the church. I actually when I joined, I thought the Spencer W. Kimball was Black. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't even know about the racism thing or like all that stuff. And a few months after I joined the church, I was talking, I think a missionary was one of them. And I said something about Spencer W. Kimball for some reason it came up and I thought he was black. They mentioned the priesthood thing. And I was like, well, what about Spencer W. Kimball? And then they're like, what do you mean? Like, well, how does he have the priesthood when he's black? And they're like, he's not black. And they just thought it was absurd. And I was like, oh, I thought he was, I didn't know. It didn't matter to me because I was always around all sorts of people, and it never like I didn't really, but I didn't. So I started learning about that, the church banning black men from being in the priesthood. And of course the women, all women could not get power like that in the church. And I had a friend who was black, and I asked him about it, and he was Mormon, and he had gone on a mission and everything. And he was encouraged me to go on a mission. And so I'm like, if he doesn't have a problem, then what is my problem about it? I didn't know enough about the history. And of course, I didn't know about the racism until way later, after I left the church, the details about the racism, especially like Brigham Young's attitudes and things like that. So I was like, learn as you go. I was a new member. I didn't even know much. They kind of just like get you to agree to all the stuff, and then they baptize you.
Exactly. They'll teach you like the basics, like how the church is set up. They'll mention the temple, but won't go into detail about, and for good reason. They ripped off Freemasonry.
Yeah.
They'll give you like the shiny outside part of things, but they won't go into the history, the real history, like not just the racism, but the polygamy and
they don't mention all sorts of stuff. They give you a distorted, even some of the stuff they teach you is complete lies, fiction made up. But when I moved back to California, I was going to school and driving limousines, living on the beach and going to church and like being pressured by these girls. And I just wanted to, like, here I was not making out with girls anymore at all. Mormon girls just don't do that. And I just wanted, like, if I'm not gonna, I should go on a mission and just get this over with, and then they'll date me. And I went, but I didn't know anything about the temple. They ask and they're like, well, it's sacred and we don't talk about it. And I'm like,
exactly.
So I went in, and the first thing, they take you to a locker room, which I had no idea about that. Mm-hmm. And you take off all your clothes and you put this thing on that just has a whole, it's like what do you call it? Poncho. Okay. It's white and the sides are open, and I had a key to the locker, and I had a big like baby pin on it, and I kind of pinned my sides together so it wasn't open. Mm-hmm. And then I went into this room. I got introduced to this old man. He took me into this room, and then I had to stand there, and he's like, dip the priesthood, and he's touching like my forehead or something and saying these things that I didn't know what he was saying. It was kind of whispering. Mm-hmm. And I asked him, I don't know, what are you saying? And he just kept whispering. It was like he didn't want to be interrupted. And he's like touching different parts of my body with oil on his fingers. And I didn't know until years later that he wasn't supposed to touch my privates, but he did. And it was really creepy and strange. And I didn't know what the hell just went on. Then you go back to your locker room, and you have garments that you purchase at the temple before you go into the temple, which are underwear. Mm-hmm. And after your body's blessed, then you put the underwear on for the first time, and then you're supposed to wear it for the rest of your life, other than showering or exercising or having sex with your wife. Mm-hmm. And so then I changed into that and put the others white clothes on. You're in a robe thing, and you go to eventually you're taken to this like classroom thing with a movie screen, and they teach you about the Adam and Eve and the history of the planet according to so-called Joseph Smith's restored gospel teachings of God. And you commit to giving everything you own, all your energy, your family relations, everything you live for should be about building up the church on earth. And you commit, and you make, when I went through, you make a blood atonement. Mm-hmm. And they have us do these different things. And one is going like this with your thumb across your neck. And if you swear that you'll keep it secret what you're told in the temple, you give your life, you sacrifice your life to be taken, and that's to slit open your neck. That's what. And you also do another one, you slit open your belly with your thumb as representative of a knife, and that was the blood atonement. They changed it now. The people who go through the temple now don't do that, but when I went through, they were still doing that.
Right.
And there's handshakes that you have to learn, and it's overwhelming. And they say, before they start, they're like, if anybody would like to back out or whatever, you please leave now. And I was with this priesthood member from my church who came with me to help take me through the temple, and all these other people were there, like people who were going to get married and they were going through the temple for the first time, and people who were going to go on their mission. So I was freaked out. I didn't know what was going on. I had already just went through that weird oil thing with that guy touching my privates and stuff. And here I am in this room, and I was like, my whole life was about the church by then. So I went and finished, and then you do these handshakes, and there's this curtain at one point where you got to talk through this curtain to somebody else, and you're shaking their hand. You can't see their face, and they're like saying things in your ear. They're like whispering these sacred things, and they give you a new name. I think my name was Joshua. It was one of those words, Josh or Jared and Jason or something. I think it was Joshua. And then you're taken into this big room that's called the celestial room. And it's just this big white room with white furniture and white walls and chandeliers that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you're supposed to feel spiritual. And I didn't feel anything. I just felt freaked out and weird. And I don't know what the hell I just went through, having like threatened your life to be taken and promising not to do this. And I don't even know what I was taught that was so sacred. It was a bunch of nonsense. And then I went on my mission, and you get to the MTC in Utah. In Provo, there's the whole campus missionary training center with all these buildings where you stay in for. I stayed there for 2 weeks. People who learn a language to go to a foreign country, you stay there for 2 months, I think, at that time. So, but I was only there for 2 weeks. But it was just like, you wake up at 6 a.m., you do this and that, you got to be here, you got to be here, you got to go to these classes, you have so much time to get ready and shower. And the first morning I went in, and there was this big shower room, and everybody has to like just get in the shower together. There's these poles,
like the military,
with showers heads, and I'm like, they're crowded, and there's no way to shower without getting next to between two naked guys. It was just, I almost left right there. I should have just left. It was too weird. Like, I got to do this for 2 weeks. So I got into like waiting until it was less crowded, but you only have a certain amount of time before you have to go to the cafeteria to eat this crappy food. And the Mormons eat really crappy food because you're in the DNC, the Doctrine and Covenants, you're supposed to take care of your body and all this stuff, but you look at the junk they eat. But so then you're going to all these classes, and you're in with like 10 other people who are in your class, and you're all together all day long. And some of them there were like 4 women. No, there were only 2 women in my group. And then the rest is like 12 guys. And almost all of us went to the same mission to New England, except for the women didn't, and this other guy didn't. My missionary training companion didn't go to my mission. He went to some other mission, and then he went home. I heard he went home early. So glad to hear that now. But we were burned out. We were both burned out when we were in the MTC. And one day we just like went to our room and slept. We couldn't deal with it one afternoon, and people were like banging on the door. We locked the door, and we're like, we're going to go to sleep. We can't even function. So we thought maybe they'll kick us out, but they didn't. So I get to my mission, and then your whole day is controlled. You're assigned like a roommate who you're with 24 hours a day. You don't even know them, and you're assigning. I was with this guy from Canada, and he would start telling me all sorts of stuff about the church that I didn't know. And yeah, that's how I learned about the church, was basically on my mission. And I didn't feel spiritual at all about being on my mission. I felt like I was wasting my time. I was with people who mostly I didn't really like, and I wouldn't have chosen to be around them. I mean, some really nice people, but they weren't like, and I felt odd because I was a convert, and everywhere you go, I was introduced as, he's a convert. I'm like, And that made a difference also in dating, because when I got off my mission and I thought, oh, I got that done with, and I don't know what that was about, and I didn't like it, I'm glad to be home, and I had to adjust to like going to school. I went to BYU briefly, I dropped out. But there's also a thing where like I found out after my mission that some Mormon families don't want their daughters even dating a convert. They want their daughters dating legacy Mormon boys who grew up in the church and have a Mormon family and all that stuff. And so I liked this one girl a lot, but her family was very against her going out with me because I was in legacy. And that was hard to understand. I'm like, I'm a return missionary. I'm doing everything right. I'm going to BYU. I'm like a really good guy. And nope, you're not. Her mother actually took her and had a conversation with her that we're a legacy family and we date legacy. And I had to learn that word. And that was disturbing, actually. And there was this other girl I really liked, and she told me that she doesn't date converts. And she said, if you really want to get married, you should probably, bring a non-member into the church and marry her. Like, okay, sure, fine. Did you get any of that when you were in the church?
No, I did not. That's a discussion for another time. So, unfortunately, we only have a few minutes left because I'm a cheapskate and I'm only using the free stuff. So, so any closing thoughts?
Well, I went through so much that I wrote these books about I went a little bit into getting out of the Mormon church and what churches are about from my view. And I use quotations from throughout history about advice from different people from every generation and century, anybody from like Leonardo da Vinci to modern day psychologists and stuff. But Dream Another Dream and Dream Your World, they're on Amazon.
All right.
And I run a screenwriting workshop in LA. I have like 1,000 screenwriters that I work with. And I wrote a screenwriting book that's used in film schools. Awesome. Screenwriting Tribe. That's on Amazon. I run it through Meetup. If you want to learn about screenwriting, you can join my screenwriting group on Meetup. It's called Screenwriting Tribe.
All right. Sounds good. Sounds great. If you ever do make it up to the Kansas City area, let me know. I'll show you around Independence. And
okay.
All right.
I have a friend who lives there. So yeah, I want to go.
All right. More to do in Independence than just Mormon stuff. I mean, Truman's libraries there, and then all sorts of cool stuff. So, yeah. All right. Well, thank you for your time. Thanks for being on the podcast, and
thank you for having me on.
Mm-hmm. So shortly after the interview, I got a message from John. I'll read the part that's relevant to our discussion. I'm glad to know you got away from the Mormon cult. It's a lousy organization ripping off people globally. The Salt Lake Tribune had an article over the weekend about how the cult is on the path to becoming worth more than $1 trillion. That's definitely a discussion for another time. Yet, they keep requiring people to give 10% of their income to the church, or the members are not in good standing, can't go to the temple, can't attend temple weddings, and won't make it into the cartoon Celestial Kingdom theme park. It's all such fraud, deception, spiritual brutality, and disgusting. And on that note, I want to thank you all so much for listening. Keep supporting the podcast. Subscribe. Share this with your friends. Get them to subscribe. Buy our merch. And do whatever we can to get the word out. Let's get as many downloads as we possibly can. All right. I like doing this podcast, and I like that I got Braden on board, and I know he likes doing the podcast, and I want to keep doing it. And with your downloads and your sharing the word is a great way to keep me motivated and all that, so we can continue to make the podcast. So once again, thank you all so much for listening, and I will talk to you next time.
This podcast is Uncalled For is hosted, produced and edited by Mike Chernefsky. Opening music is I Thought You Were Cool by Holy Isna CC0, licensed under a Creative Commons 0.1.0 Universal License. The outro music for this episode is Saturday's Church by Montplaisir, licensed under a Creative Commons CC 0.1.0 Universal License. Please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast through your favorite podcasting platform. Like our Facebook page at facebook.com/uncalledforpodcast, and check out our blog with show notes at uncalledfor.home.blog. If you are in the United States or Canada, you can call us at 816-832-5160. Leave your message or question for us, and if we like it, we will play it on the podcast. Please support the podcast and purchase our exclusive Uncalled For merchandise. T-shirts, sweatshirts, mugs, stickers, and so much more. Go to www.cafepress.com/uncalledforpod. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next time.